Namahesru Ramdas Menon. I'm welcoming Sumanth Bhat, am I got that name correct? Yes. For an interview about his lovely film called MITHYA, which is being screened at the Indian Indie Meme Film Festival in 2024. I'm going to first of all read out some comments from our panel of reviewers who saw the movie. These are the words I've extracted from them. It's a complex movie, focused on the psychological impact on a child, great cinematography, tackling taboo topics. And congratulations to you and your team. I understand that you got some accolades at the Mami Mumbai Film Festival and also the South Asia competition, as well as the Bangalore International Film Festival in 2024. So congratulations are in order.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let me start by jumping into my first question. You wrote the screenplay, am I right?
Yes.
Prior to this, you had made a short movie called Niralu, and but your background is actually in software engineering. So the audience, my audience in Austin will have a lot of software engineers. But tell us how you made the transition or take an interest in the creative arts and kind of transition towards that area.
Yeah. So I mean, my graph has been a little all over the place. I did my engineering in industrial engineering and management, and then I went to IT, which had nothing to do with my engineering background. And I worked in IT for 5 years. I'd been to New York once on work, and then that is when I decided that maybe I just want to go back. And because sometime during my engineering and before I joined IT, I had some 3 months for myself. I finished my engineering degree, and I'd gotten placed in this company called Cognizant Technology Solutions. And I was given 3 months before I report for work. So in those 3 months, because I had nothing else to do and a lot of my friends had already joined their companies, I had a handycam at home, and that is when I just took to the camera. And I was home and I was like, okay, how does this work? And so a friend of mine and I got together. We did a film where I acted and he shot. And then we did the other film. We enjoyed the process. We are figuring out how do we edit films. And we had a Windows machine and we had a Windows movie maker. So we kind of decided, we learned how to put a film together. So we were excited. The next film I shot and he acted. So that's how it got started. But then I joined my company, and then I think, 5 years just flew by. We did not have much time to explore short films, but we did a couple of short films here and there. So I worked for 5 years and then quit with the idea of pursuing filmmaking as a part-time thing. Then I moved back to my native, set up my own company, and then again 10 years passed by before me realizing that I've not done anything related to films. So in 2020, basically, we finally quit. We closed down our companies. We had a couple of companies, this friend of mine and I, the friend who was with me during the initial short filming days. So we closed down the 2 companies that we had, and we took a plunge into full-time filmmaking. So I was a 3-4 short film old already by then, and kind of had figured out how to go about filmmaking. I was not sure if I was good or bad at it, but I thought, let's take a chance, because if not now, then when? So in 2020 is when I took the plunge, and then the pandemic happened. So kind of there's a slight setback with the, with the idea. So in 2021, latter half of 2021 is when I started writing MITHYA. And then, 2022, we shot it, completed, and that's been the journey so far.
So this is your first full-length feature?
Yes, this is my first feature-length film. Yeah.
Great. Was there anything in your family background which, which kind of tilted towards creative arts?
Kind of, no, nothing at all. So I am the black sheep in the family. There's absolutely no one who has anything to do with arts in general. Forget films. There's nobody who is pursuing music or dance or any form of art. So everyone's a little surprised, saying, when did this kid bite you? Because where did they start? Because I myself don't have an answer. I think I don't have a very specific point in my life where I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But I think during my engineering days, when I had a lot of time for myself after engineering, I did a film festival in Bangalore. And for the first time, I think I was exposed to world cinema. I was exposed to a lot of European cinema. And that is when it struck me, saying, films can also be this. Films can also tell stories like this. So, because the typical Indian films that we have grown up watching, that always felt out of bounds. That was too much glamour, too much scale, very grand and all that. And that always felt out of bounds for me. Whereas this film felt like these are stories stories of people like me, done with no gloss and all that. So this still felt like a easier uh, thing to have a go at. So maybe that is when it started. When I was exposed to a lot of French films in particular, I thought, yeah, I would want to make films like this sometime.
Fantastic. Let me move to the next question, which is, how did you manage to get into the mind of an 11-year-old boy who spoke minimally? He wasn't very verbal. Yet you were able to project his mindset onto a screen pretty well. Describe your research.
Okay, so initially I might have to kind of just go back a little, saying where the seed for the film came from.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it was way back in 2020. There was a distant relative of ours who lived in Mumbai, a family of 4, and the father succumbed to some illness. It was a very untimely death, and in India we have a funeral that goes on for 13 days. On the 13th day is when they have the final funeral. So on the 13th day of the death, the mother committed suicide. I mean, there's no note, nothing that said why. And they were a decent, they're a well-to-do family, and so they're not under a financial stress as such. And the bodies were brought back to my native hometown, Udupi, and I attended the funeral of the mother. And I saw the 2 kids. They had 2 kids. One a 11-year-old boy as old as MITHYA, and the other was a 3.5-year-old boy, I think, 3.5, 4-year-old boy. And at the funeral, of course, the elder boy was doing all the things that a son is supposed to do on his mother's funeral, but the younger kid was a little slightly lost, and he was still playing with other kids. He was laughing on his mother's funeral, he had no idea what was going on. And that image haunted me for a long time, of this kid who was in his mother's funeral laughing and playing like any other kid. So, and I went back home and I kept thinking, when will the kid understand the gravity of what has happened, and how do kids grieve, and how do kids mourn the death of their parents and things like this. And me being a parent, I have 2 kids who are 7 and 3. So I was maybe a lot more attracted to that. Fascinated would be the wrong word, but that question kept coming back to me, saying, if I were to just vanish tomorrow, how will my kids take to it? So I was approaching that question of how do kids grieve through the lens of me being a father. So this is the seed for the film. And again, coming back to your question of how I was able to get into the psyche, again, it again goes back to me being a father of 2 kids, plus I have a nephew who is 11-year-old, and who was a major reference point for writing MITHYA also. Because I've grown up around these 3 kids for the good part of my last 7, 8 to 10 years. So that helped immensely. I don't think I would have been able to do half as much justice to MITHYA had I written it, say, 4 years back or 5 years back. And outside of that, when I decided that I'm going to make a film, so this image and this entire that phase of 2 or 3 months when I kept going back to it, that came back, and I decided that this has to be my first film. So when I started writing is when I realized that I have not experienced any of it. I've not lost a father at such a young age, and I don't know how to deal with displacement, where this kid is kind of picked from a metro like Mumbai and put into a small town or a village like Udupi, where there are language issues, so many other things that he has to deal with. So I faced none of it. So then is when I started reading up a lot. I found a lot of research on orphaned kids, more specifically on kids who are orphaned with either one of or both their parents committing suicide, because that's a very specific case. Like, say, losing your parents to an accident or something is still okay, but losing your parents to suicide, where they've opted to leave you back, that's a lot more difficult to come to terms with for kids. And they carry that grudge, that pain for a longest time, even till their 60s, 70s, whatever. But the problem there was a lot of these research papers were based on kids in the US. So I was not very sure if I would have the context right. So basically, I had an outline structure for the story ready, and then I read these research papers. Then I went to a psychiatric hospital here, and I spoke to the counselor saying, this is what I'm thinking, and this is how my kid would react. Would this be right or wrong, or pushing it too much? And they're like, no, you're absolutely spot on. They do this. And then they started recounting stories that they had encountered, which kind of made their way into the story. And then I also visited a a juvenile home that we see in the film. Now, so basically in India, we do not have, that's not a juvenile home, that's an orphanage. Okay, but there is also something called a child and women welfare committee here. So what happens is sometimes there's a child who is, and there's something about a child is stuck in some legal battle and all that. They do not have a dedicated home, shelter home to put him in. So they put him in these orphanages home, but they are put in a separate room. So I went to those orphanages. So there they came up with a lot more stories. So that also kind of made its way into the film in some form or the other. So all this kind of helped bring the film to some shape in the eventually.
Anyway, you and your team did a great job, and the story was very taut and tight. There are several scenes where Mithya or Mithun is invisible, yet listening to adult conversations. I love those scenes, especially, and I want to compliment your DOP, Udit Khurana, and you for actually coming up with the scenes, because it reminded me a lot about my own childhood. You're invisible, but you're accessible. But I want to focus on the ending scene, the last few minutes, which is difficult to watch for an audience, but ultimately a drowning was averted. It could just have gone the other way, right? And my question is, as a writer, what made you decide the outcome for the last scene?
Okay. So for me, I mean, a plain simple answer would be, I still see a lot of hope in kids. If Mithya were a 20-year-old or a 25, 30-year-old, maybe the outcome would have been different. I would still like to have a lot of hope and believe that kids are way more mature. I mean, I've always been saying this in a lot of Q&A sessions, that kids are way more mature than we give them credit for. Being a father, and I see how kids process things. They might process. We kind of tend to take them for granted, saying, these are things that you do not understand at this point, but they do. And they react very maturely if only we give them the space. So the simple answer would be, I have hope in kids, or I'd like to believe that I'm right in being hopeful about kids taking the right decision. But also, having said that, I think when I thought of making the film, one of the first things that I was very sure of was the climax. Okay, so for me, there is this boy who is going through so much trauma, but what is the end of it, or where is the healing, or if there is healing at all? So for me, that is when I decided it has to be the beginning of healing, where the film has to end at a point where there is the beginnings of a healing of some sorts for the boy. Because in cases like this, from everything that I've read up and spoken to the psychiatrist, there is no healing. There's no coming to terms at all. There is always going to be reminiscence of that. It's going to stay back. It's going to come back to haunt you at some point. So for me, the film could never have ended at a point where there is a happily ever after. It was only if only, or there is ifs and buts and things of signs of a better future. So I knew that. And so for me, that point had to be a catharsis for the boy. And the boy never cries in the film. He only cries in the end. And that, for me, is just letting go of everything and embracing whatever he has. Embracing the holding the sister tight. So for me, that was a great beginning point for healing for the boy. So I thought that was really apt for what I was going after also.
Yeah. In the scenes of the boys' home or orphanages you referred to, there is a scene where church service is being conducted, and given that there are almost no other references to religion in the movie, what were you trying to convey with that particular scene?
Okay. So, I mean, there's a very small bit in one of the opening stretches of the film where he goes and turns off the light. He's in this room where the ceiling fan is running, and he's annoyed with the sound, and he goes out and he turns on the table fan and sleeps there. And then there's this fancy LED lights that you generally have on all these Indian gods' photos back home. So he's a little annoyed with that. He's also at this point where he's questioning his faith and questioning God and everything on his own. He's reacting to things how a 11-year-old would. He's at that point where he's even questioning, saying, why should I pray and all that? So he turns off the light at that point. There's also a bit in the latter half of the film where he turns off, his aunt asks him to turn off the oil lamp. He turns off the oil lamp, but he also turns off the lamp from the gods, lamps that is lit up for the gods. He's at that point, and suddenly he's put into this where he is the only odd man out there. every kid is praying, and it's praying to a different god. So it is just trying to play on his psyche, saying there is a boy who is displaced from Mumbai to this. There's a he's people are very alien. They speak a different language. He understands it, of course, but they read and write a different language. There's a different culture. It's a different pace altogether. Plus, this is further displacement. You are also displaced to a location where there's a different faith. You yourself are in a point where you have no faith, or you're questioning your faith. So you are put into a different place where there is further displacement. So I was only trying to push that envelope a little.
Oh, well done. Share with us some of the perspectives you have on the independent film scene in India, especially in regional languages like Kannada. I've seen interviews where you mentioned the word poor state of affairs and everything. So you want to elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, you have made my job easier then. But yeah, I mean, I've generally been a little more pessimistic. But I think now that I've traveled traveled a few festivals, and I think I'm right when I say that it's actually a sad state, because one, generally in India, because with the boom of OTT, like say going back to why I finally in 2020 decided to quit and jump into filmmaking, was because of the boom of the OTT space. Because I, for the longest time, had this reservation that film is a very expensive art form. You have to put in so much money. Why would somebody risk so much of his money, hard-earned money, for a film that I have to say? Because filmmaking is a very personal form of expression. Why would somebody risk so much money? So that was something I was not very comfortable with. So only when OTTs came into the forefront and I was seeing a lot of independent films coming there and finding their audience, I thought, okay, then now I can exist. I can still exist in this ecosystem where I can make a small film, a very personal film, and still my film can find its audience. But that was such a short-lived phase, because pandemic happened, and then suddenly all the big films are coming on OTT, and now suddenly OTTs do not want only big films. So OTTs are like the new studio system here. They want films with big stars or big directors, and if you're a small film, they either don't want you or they want you on their terms, which is ridiculous. For kind of the pricing offers that the pricing plans that they're offering is ridiculous for somebody who has an iota of idea of how much a film costs. So that way, and I've been speaking to a lot of filmmakers from the other states also now. I always thought it was only Kannada, because Kannada is given a stepmotherly or stepbrotherly treatment, is what I felt for the longest time, which is also true to a certain extent. But the scene is the same with all the even with Hindi independent filmmakers. They are like, the OTTs don't want it, and they say that we don't have the numbers to justify putting your film there at a certain cost. So it's a little sad. I constantly ask myself also, saying what is the kind of films that I want to be making? Because if I make a film like MITHYA and the film does not find its audience, then why make a film at all? Because it's very difficult to find a platform for films like this back in India. So I don't know. I can't say. I'll not be very honest if I say hopeful, but I really wish that something happens in the coming few months, because there are so many films from India that are fantastic that I've seen also, but that do not have a platform, that people have not watched.
Okay. So the ecosystem is still evolving and developing, or you don't know where it's going.
I honestly don't know where it's going, unless there is some major disruption that happens. And if it goes on like this, then indie films are dying for sure. And I've heard the biggest of directors from the Hindi industry telling aspiring filmmakers that indie films are dead. So move on and make genre films and all that. And these are people I've looked up to. So if they are saying it, they have sensed it, they are in the industry. I'm still working out of the setup. If they are seeing it, then the future definitely looks bleak for the indie films. So the only hope is festivals, but festival still does not translate to the commerce. No, festival translates to you finding an audience, but that is still at a smaller number. If you want to sustain and keep making films like this, then you want people to come together, a lot of watch it, and an ecosystem where you have a large audience base, which at least as of now, I don't think there is many.
So what's next for you in terms of your film career? What are you working on right now?
I'm working on a film I would not call it a thriller, but a crime drama. I mean, we know that there's something that has happened. There's a death that happens right in the beginning. The film is just the unraveling of what happened and how it has happened, and there are different versions to to the actual event. So it's that it still has kids around it, and I don't know. Every time I tell myself that I'm not going to work on kids anymore, because I've worked with kids in my short films also, because it's a very it asked for a lot of patience, working with kids. So every time after a film, I say I'm no longer going to work with kids. But even this film has kids, not at the center, but as a very important. The film has 3 kids who play very important roles in the film. So
Well,
that is one. I've also written a web series on a serial killer, a real life serial killer from my hometown. Again, there is, like I said, the OTTs they do not want Kannada in the language which I speak. They want something in Hindi and with big names attached and all that. So I don't know if that's happening anytime soon. But the film, I'm a little excited for right now, because I'm almost nearing the end of the writing phase for the initial drafts at least. So I don't know. I'm hopeful of making that anytime soon, or sometime later this year, maybe.
Okay. Well, that brings me to the end of the questions I have. Would you like to add anything else to the end of the interview?
Nothing. I really hope that the audience enjoyed the film. And if there's any way where I can get to see or interact with the audience or have their feedback or what they thought of it, it would be wonderful, because that is what keeps me going as a filmmaker, just to have these interactions with the audience and have that assurance key audience have connected to your film and audience have liked your film, or if they have not connected with something, I'd just like to have that conversation. So if there's any way, I really hope that the audience love the film in the first place, and if there's in any way they can reach out to me or let them know, put their thoughts out through any channel or any medium or something, to be fantastic. I'm not on social media, so that's a drawback, because I can't get to interact with people. But yeah, I really hope the audience loved the film and I somehow get to know what they thought of the film. That's all.
Well, thank you very much for this very nice interview. I mean, I really enjoyed the movie. It is one of the best I've watched in many years, and I think it will make a major impact on the audience. So,
I really hope so.
All right. Good luck with your future ventures, and
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.